Welcome to the Fox Den Podcast, where leaders gather to grow.
Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode here in the Fox Den, where leaders gather to grow. And Randy Fox here with you today with a great friend of mine, an amazing C-suite coach and speaker, Jennifer Eggers. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me, Randy. I'm so excited about the podcast, and it's an honor to be here.
Yeah, awesome. As you can see, everybody, over her left shoulder, there's a book there entitled Mastering the C-Suite. She also has it in her hand. And that's Jen's newest book. But we're just going to talk a little bit today. And just to be clear, this is not a message, nor is the book just for people that are in the C-suite. This is really something to help leaders at all levels grow, which is really what our podcast is all about. So I guess, Jen, let's just kind of start with, what you're seeing that leaders need and are struggling. 2025 has been a interesting year, to say the least, and there's a lot of still unknowns economically and so forth. And what are you kind of just seeing out there with leaders at all levels that they're struggling with that we could help them with today, first and foremost?
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that. So, when I wrote the book, what I tried to do is come up with the themes that over 30 years of coaching and doing consulting and whatnot, you sort of see some patterns. And so, I went back and said, okay, what were those patterns? What were the most critical ones? And they're all, I think I've seen every one of them since I started the year in my coaching practice. So it's pretty timely, pretty relevant. And that's been incredibly validating. But, there are so many that are really real. And, I guess the first thing I'll talk about is, I don't think I have, a client right now that's not just trying to figure out how to get more done with what they have, just how do we get more done with available resources? And, the economy is kind of tight for everybody. Nobody knows quite what's going to happen, so there's a lot of challenges right now. And, a couple of things that I hear, and, so first of all, there are things in the book like, imposter syndrome, for example. What do I do when I go to a meeting and I don't know anything about the topic? How do I contribute and add value? That's very real. And it's real for almost every one of my clients right now. So I hear that over and over, but that, it's kind of one of the softer things that we hear. But, also this notion of scenario planning, I think in times like this, in an economy like this, really brainstorming and thinking through what are some things that could happen? And then how do we prioritize and really build some plans to get ahead of some of the things that could be ahead for us in business? And I see that in every industry I deal with right now.
Yeah, so let's take that first one. I love that imposter syndrome. I think people at all levels and all kinds of organizations, right, can find themselves not necessarily knowing how they fit in, but they want to contribute, they want to bring value. Maybe they're afraid to speak up because they don't know what they really need to say, especially if there's like a C-suite executive in the room or maybe it's the superintendent, right? And they're involved and they've been asked to be on some task force and they're a newer teacher, right? It can be, there's all kinds of examples where you feel like, do I belong? What are a couple of things that you recommend for people that might find themselves in that situation?
Yeah, great question. I think, it's so common. And we talk about it at the C-suite, but it happens at every level, like you said, where, you're invited to a meeting and you sit down and you realize that, you're the one in the room that probably knows the least amount about the topic. And so it's like, what do I do now, right? You're invited for your point of view and you want to add value, but how do you add value when you don't know as much? And so what I tell leaders in that situation is, you're going to be sort of graded, if you will. The way people perceive you is sort of like the grade you get in the business world on the degree to which you're able to demonstrate what I call visible leadership in the moment. And so the catch is that visible leadership doesn't have to be expertise. It can be a lot of things. So what I tell people is look around the room and see who's contributed and who hasn't. Maybe you invite some of the people that haven't contributed to contribute. So you can actually play the facilitator role in that situation. And you can start, kind of going around the room and making sure that everybody, has a chance to contribute, making sure that, someone's not dominating, making sure that you're inviting perspectives from people who might not be asked. And what's interesting about that is everyone loves to be asked. They love to feel important. So if you can be the one that invites the person who maybe isn't contributing, maybe they're a little more quiet, maybe they just got run over by, the guy that dominates the conversation, or the woman that dominates the conversation. It's not always a guy. If you can play the facilitator role, even if it's just looking at the time and saying, gosh, we only have 15 more minutes. I want to make sure we get to, the next steps and the action items. What do we need to do with what we've learned? Or maybe you're the one saying, and I love this question. It's like, if I were like 5 years old and didn't know anything about this, how would you describe the problem? Right? You're not going to say that you don't know anything about it, but you might say, let's pretend I don't know anything about it. How would you describe the problem? Right? And that just kind of gets people to summarize, what are we really dealing with? What's the real issue? And that actually plays a really valuable role. So it's playing that facilitator role, I think, that can often allow you to contribute even when you don't know as much.
Yeah, I love that. And as you were speaking, I was literally thinking, like, if I don't know anything, what should I be doing? And you started to answer that question, is ask a question. And
Yes.
I love how you're asking it as like, if I was a 5-year-old and we didn't know anything, how would you explain it? But sometimes just asking a follow-up question, or I have found working with people, and coaching and being in rooms just like yourself, or back when I was in the corporate world, that sometimes somebody says something and the ability to say, that's an interesting perspective. Can you tell me a little bit more about how you think that would work, or where we would use that, how we would go? And when I say that to people, is that I'm not telling them that I agree with their perspective.
That's
And
right.
I'm not saying that I disagree with it. I'm acknowledging them and saying, that's interesting. Tell me more. And to your point, it's not only a facilitation, but it's actually a way to get people to go deeper.
Yes.
And then I think when you really don't know as much, or you're not comfortable in a room, when you demonstrate that you're willing to listen to other people,
Oh,
that you want to hear them out.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me more. That's interesting. Like you said, if I were a 5-year-old, just questions to get others speaking and you absorbing is really powerful to becoming a contributor in the longer run, because it's not just about that meeting, right? It's about being an influencer over time.
Absolutely. And I did forget to mention that, and I'm so glad you expanded on this notion of questions. So, the other thing is, you always want to be perceived as strategic in some of these meetings. And so we have in the book, in the same chapter, there are 12 questions you can ask in basically any meeting that link things that will demonstrate strategic thinking and help connect dots for people and link back to strategy. So one of those questions you could ask about, and just about any initiative, is, can we just talk for a minute about how does this drive our strategy? Or what part of our strategy does this link to? So we provide, or I should say I provide, I don't have a co-author on this book, but I do provide, I think there's 12 questions in there that you can ask about any initiative that will, kind of allow you to demonstrate visible leadership, but in a way that paints you really as a strategic thinker.
Yeah. And it's so powerful. And to your point, any role, any organization, it doesn't matter it doesn't matter if you're 65 and you've been in the role 40 years, or if you're 25 and you're brand new. Anybody can ask a simple question to continue the dialogue, to get deeper conversation, because ultimately, right, it as you talk about in the book, right, really mastering the C-suite is really about the relationships and the conversations.
100%. 100%. And if you're the one that deepens that learning for the parties in the room, you're going to be perceived as a leader. There's no question.
Yeah, and to expand this, because I think some people might say, well, I'm not always in a room, I'm not always in a meeting. Well, let's use the term room loosely, right? You still have interactions. you still have email communications maybe that are going to a group of people, or maybe it's just a passing conversation that's informal. There are still ways, right, by asking questions. My grandfather always used to say to me, right, that if you really want to gain rapport and respect, be the last one to speak. And he's like, listening to others first. Because when you just and that, I got to be honest, that was not me in the corporate world. Like, I would come in, I'd have my agenda, and I wanted to ram it down everybody's throat. And it was, there's salespeople that, right, the old line was, and I was a sales rep, 30 plus years ago. It was called show up and throw up, right? I'm the sales rep that would show up and tell you everything great about my organization and why you should do business with me. And that doesn't work. The best salespeople are the same ones that master the C-suite, which they show up and they say, how are things? Tell me what some of the things are that you're struggling with. And then they ask questions to learn how they can help.
Yeah, very true.
Yeah. So the role, really doesn't matter from that perspective. So tell me something else. Tell everybody here that may be watching or listening, what from the book or from what you're doing in coaching right now with people is being most effective? What is kind of that one thing that you're landing back on that you see that people are just grabbing onto, and it is helping them in their organization, in the results, maybe them personally? Did I freeze?
Can you ask that again? Because you froze and then it fast forwarded the comments.
Well, yes, and we'll edit that right out. Yeah. So tell us, for those that might be watching or listening, what's something that is really resonating, that is helping teams be successful or individuals grow? What is something that you're tapping into, whether it's from the book or just even something that you're doing? What are you finding that is like, boom, this is something that maybe somebody could take away with today, that we can give them something practical to help them grow?
Yeah, there's a couple things that are just, I feel like this practice, it kind of like goes in spurts. Sometimes it's like everybody's struggling with the same thing, and it might be one thing this year, and then next year it's, a totally different thing. And so right now, there's really two themes in my practice right now, and one of them is storytelling. So, this notion of being able to really tell, and I don't mean, tell a story about the boat you were on when you went to the lake this weekend. I mean, like a business story, right? So, here's something we want to talk about. I've got a particular ask I want to make. And then, how do I tell it in a concise way that doesn't just overwhelm the listener? And I feel like I've had like 3 clients this year that have had that as their sort of development need. And so I actually wrote a model that, to help with that, because I looked and I searched, and it's kind of funny. I have this enormous bookshelf of, every business book imaginable, and I couldn't find anything that really fit the bill. And so, for storytelling. So, I came up with this model called T-Barn. Now you're going to put me on the spot and see if I can remember all the components, but I did write a blog about it, and you could probably put that in your show notes. It explains the whole thing. But T-Barn is pretty easy to remember. So the way it works is the topic is first. So, hey, Randy, I want to talk to you about this particular project that we're doing. And, here's some background. So the B in the barn is background. So here's some of the background. Here's some things we've done up until now. But I really need your help. And the A is action. So this is what needs to happen next. And if we do that, we're going to get these particular results. So the R is results. And so in order to do that, there's these next steps that we need to follow. And the N is next steps. So it's a super simple, and I mean, I don't really think about that often. So I was just able to rattle that off pretty easily. It's an easy acronym to remember. But if you follow the T-Barn method, it's very, very easy to tell a story. So you're prepping the listener for, hey, I want to talk to you about X. So you're being very direct, very specific. You're providing a small bit of background, like a sentence, not, a whole novel. And then the ask is very quick, right? So we immediately get, very quickly to the ask, and then the why is the results, and what do we need to do next is the next step. So it's very short, it's very concise, it's to the point, and it really keeps. I've had a couple of clients that were, kind of long-winded engineer types that typically want to talk about a lot of detail that maybe the audience doesn't. Depending on the audience, some people want the detail, but when you're dealing with your CFO or a senior leader that might not really care all about every last detail, it allowed them to really have a very concise way to make a business case quickly. And it even works. This even works in an email. I had one guy that we literally rewrote a bunch of his emails, and that worked really well. So T-Barn's been huge this year for us. And it just was born out of, necessity, because there wasn't anything like it. Yeah.
I love it. And I love the acronym. It's like, it's easy to remember, and it can work anywhere. Like, I literally think like it could work with a teenager, for
Absolutely.
parents. It could work with a coach of a team. It can work with teachers in a classroom. Like, it can work with somebody that has a relationship, a significant other, a spouse. Like, any communication where you've got something and you're saying that you need some action and want to move things in a certain direction. I love that. And I think it's practical, it's simple. And I say this all of the time. Simple things can produce significant results and change. And when we do simple things in a consistent way, it doesn't have to be the most complicated, innovative thing in the world. Sometimes a little bit of growth or a lot of growth can come from just a very simple action. And I just love, we talked about the imposter syndrome today. We talked about this T-Barn and just some real things to help people as they grow. And as it always does, the time goes by so fast. We could spend hours doing this, but actually
there's 12 more in here.
Yeah. And the reality is that we do spend hours, right? Both you and I are very blessed to be able to coach individuals and teams and be on stages and speak. And if people would love to connect with you, what is the best way for them to reach you?
Yeah, our website is www.leadershift.insights.com. So the word leader followed by the word shift, SHIFT, and then the word insights, INSIGHTS.com is our website. You can certainly get me there. Email jeggers@leadershiftinsights.com. If you want the short version of that, jeggers@lsiteam.com. I'm on LinkedIn at Eggers, and then let's see, Facebook. I think it's Jennifer Eggers, Executive Advisor. Thank you, Randy, for having me on the podcast. It's really been awesome to be here. And for those of you in the listening audience, if you're looking for a speaker that's really pragmatic, and you've heard Randy, right? He's bringing you this podcast with some real tools that are super pragmatic that you can take away right now and use in your real life immediately. That's the kind of speaker Randy is. So I would urge you to get in touch with him as well.
Well, thank you for that. I appreciate it. I absolutely would love to help people and bring them a message and experience, right? That, as I always say, I want to help them think and grow, laughter, emotions moving, all of that in one wrapped up roller coaster experience. So, well, thank you for being with us today as well. All the viewers and listeners out there, we appreciate your support. You can always find me at foxpoint.net. And until we meet again, may you always remember that the world is waiting for you. We'll see you all real soon. Thanks again, Jen.
Visit us at foxpoint.net and StephenAllenFox.com.